This is my favorite 4K gaming monitor. It's called the Philips Evnia 32M2N8900, which sports a flat 31.5-inch glossy QD-OLED panel, which operates a resolution of 4K and a refresh rate of 240Hz. Better still, it has got support for DisplayHDR True Black 400, adaptive sync technologies, Ambi-Glow, and also has those fabled HDMI 2.1 ports. Now at the time of filming and in UK it can be found for £1,040. Now before proceeding with this review, I would just like to thank MSI for actually sponsoring this video. More on them a little bit later. So to kick things off, let's talk about its input lag. And yes, I had it objectively tested at 0 milliseconds. You'll be able to see how it compares to the plethora of other monitors that I've recently tested, and including some of the other 4K gaming monitors out there. All the monitors actually do a tremendous job in this department, but it's good to see that the Philips also does a good job. Now it is worth mentioning over here that this figure was attained with the low input lag mode enabled via the monitor's OSD. For some reason it does actually become grayed out when you do enable adaptive sync technologies, in other words AMD FreeSync or NVIDIA G-Sync. Now I don't have an objective measurement for this, but subjectively I can tell you that there was no actual increase of input delay with adaptive sync technologies enabled, at least not something that I was able to perceive. Ultimately what I'm trying to say over here is that with or without adaptive sync technologies enabled, the monitor's input lag is stonkingly good, and therefore while playing even hardcore competitive games on a 31.5-inch form factor, I had no problems whatsoever when it came to registering my mouse inputs. Now it actually gets even better because the monitor's response time is stonkingly good. Using the OSRTD tool, you'll be able to see at the bottom left-hand side of your screen the average initial time, which translates to the average G2G which most manufacturers claim. And yes, it was clocked in at just 0.79 milliseconds. Better still, I absolutely love the fact that the percent in window sits at a perfect 100%, and therefore meaning that the monitor does really hit that 240Hz refresh rate window. Now it is also worth mentioning that there is no sort of overshoot to worry about, in other words purple trailing like you might come to expect with an LCD panel, in other words an IPS, a VA or a TN. And yet again this is due to the fact that it is running an OLED panel instead. Here you'll be able to see the UFO ghosting test at 240Hz, it is absolutely perfect. It is also worth mentioning over here that this monitor does not have any sort of motion blur reduction technologies, or MBR for short, and therefore you can't exactly get a clearer image, which might come as a little bit disappointment to certain individuals, but frankly given the overall visual experience, the response time and the overall input lag of this monitor, I have no quarrels whatsoever. Moving on, we get on to adaptive sync technologies, and the monitor does not have a built-in G-Sync module and therefore has a VRR range from 48 up to 240Hz. Now, using my setup, which has an RTX 3080 and a display port connected up to the monitor, I had no issues running the NVIDIA Pendulum demo. However, it is worth noting that very much like a lot of OLEDs out there, there's a bit of VR flicker. It's not something that really throws me off in the slightest, especially if you go into a game, but I thought I should highlight it in case you're overly sensitive of flickering, so therefore you might want to consider disabling adaptive sync technologies if that's something that you might find a little bit annoying. Now nonetheless over here, while playing a game such as Destiny 2, I found it to be an even better experience, because not only was I running 4K at 240Hz with NVIDIA G-Sync, but I also was able to run it simultaneously with HDR. Now the HDR experience is absolutely sublime. Thanks to the fact that you've got an OLED panel and therefore all the pixels can be switched off, and given the fact that you have got the True Black 400 mode that you can select via the monitor's OSD, you get a real lifelike image. The contrast is fantastic and the colors really do pop. You can go on to one of the other HDR modes, for example the HDR 1000 max mode, which gives you up to 1000 nits of peak brightness, but in all honesty I actually preferred limiting the brightness to roughly 400 nits because the True Black 400 mode gave me an even better color reproduction. Here, if HDR is something that you're really looking forward to, well, safe to say that this monitor does a stonkingly good job in this department as well, and therefore means that be it for competitive gaming or even more casual gaming with HDR enabled, you're going to be left absolutely jaw-dropped. On that note, I would like to have a quick word for console gamers, because this monitor has got two HDMI 2.1 ports. And this means that you can output 4K at up to 240Hz. But of course, if you are on a console, you'll be capped at 120Hz. Now via the monitor's OSD, you've even got a dedicated 120Hz mode that you can enable, which can be handy in certain scenarios. Now nonetheless over here, in terms of the overall responsiveness at 120Hz, I can safely say that it's actually very good. because using the OSRTD tool and looking at the average initial time, it sits at just 0.85 milliseconds. And the same could be said at 60 Hz, where the average initial time clocked in at 0.89 milliseconds. Suffice to say over here, when it comes to overall console gaming, be it 120 Hz or 60 Hz, the monitor does a very good job. And as for the overall motion clarity, it is actually pretty good. Do bear in mind over here that 120 Hz and 60 Hz will look a lot more blurry in comparison to 240 Hz, but that's almost no surprise given the lower refresh rate range. On the subject of the overall gaming performance, this perfectly brings me on to today's sponsor, MSI. The manufacturer's range of QD-OLED monitors offer a refresh rate of up to 360 Hz, fast response times, excellent HDR, impressive motion clarity, and flawless contrast ratios. MSI's exclusive gaming intelligent chips give hardware-level advantages on games, while OLED Care 2.0 and the custom graphene heatsink help prevent burn-in issues. You also have peace of mind as MSI provides 3 years of burn-in warranty. To find out more and to check out the manufacturer's Black Friday deals, click on the link in the description below or in the pinned comments. Shifting our attention back to the Philips, I would like to talk about its image quality, because here you have got a flat 31.5-inch glossy QD-OLED panel. Now the glossy finish will certainly be appreciated by certain individuals, because it gives a better sort of image quality, that contrast, and also will certainly be appreciated if you have HDR. Although it is worth mentioning that you will suffer from reflections, at least if you have a bright sunlit room, and given it has got a QD-OLED panel rather than a WOLED, it means that there's a slight red tinge to it, at least if you have got a completely pitch black image on the monitor and a very bright room. You'll be able to see the reflections are kind of reddish. Doesn't really bother me in the slightest. Now this actually does bring me onto its overall color accuracy, because via the monitor's OSD you've got a dedicated sRGB, Adobe RGB and DCI-P3 color modes, although the latter is actually quite problematic, which I'll be touching upon very shortly. You've also got full brightness controls on all the modes, which is also very appreciated. Now concentrating on the sRGB mode first, you'll be able to see that via my calibrators, I notice a gamut coverage of 97.4% and a gamut volume of 100.5%. Below you can see how it compares to the sRGB standard. The average delta-E sits at just 0.7 with a maximum of 2.01. Therefore it can certainly be used for serious image editing work or video grading. As for its tested contrast ratio, it sits at infinity to 1 due to having an OLED panel, while its measured white point is pretty much bang on at 6422 Kelvin at 100% in comparison to the 6504 Kelvin target. As for its gamma curve, it is again pretty much bang on the 2.2 standard. Now in the Adobe RGB mode, you can see that the gamut coverage and gamut volumes have been positively affected, sitting at 94.3% and 112.3% respectively. Below you can see how it compares to the standard. Unfortunately, the overall color accuracy does drop away from 0 to an average delta of 1.89 and a maximum of 5.8. Therefore, you might want to use this for less serious image editing work or video grading. Its tested contrast ratio does not shift, however its measured white point does slightly move to 6109 Kelvin at 100%, and as for its gamma curve, yet again it's pretty much bang on to the 2.2 standard. Now where problems arise are with the DCI-P3 color space, and here I do suspect it's because the overall firmware of the monitor is slightly wrong, because in the DCI-P3 color space it should be running the Gamma 2.6, however it's running Gamma 2.2 for some given reason. If you do try and switch it via the monitor's OSD, it will automatically switch you out of the color space and put you in the 6500 Kelvin preset. Now actually using my calibrators, I was able to actually note that DCI-P3 color mode is not actually color accurate, and also its gamma values are actually off. Here you can see that the gamma coverage and gamma volume sit at 97.6% and 118.9% respectively, while here the average delta and the maximum delta sit at 3.81 and 8.11 respectively. Again, it is not color accurate in said color space, at least not at the time of filming. Its measured white point is not too bad at 6152 Kelvin at 100%, but here you can see that the gamma is seriously off the 2.6 standard. Indeed, it is actually trying to hit the 2.2 standard as it is what is set on the monitor's OSD, rather than actually going to the 2.6 standard, which is actually required for the DCI-P3 color space. What I suspect what might be happening is here it's actually being tuned towards the display P3 color space, but yet again, even in comparison to this color space, it's actually not accurate either. Now, aside from its overall color performance, what about when it comes to brightness? Well, in HDR, in the peak HDR 1000 mode, I recorded 981 nits. Indeed, it does get blindingly bright. As for in the True Black 400 mode, due to the overall requirements, it does drop down to 445 nits. In SDR, it is still relatively bright at 234 nits, however it does mean that you might have to run it at roughly 80 to 90% brightness in a bright sunlit room. It does get all the way down to 45 nits, although it's not as low as some of the other OLEDs that I've previously reviewed that get even further down, therefore getting even dimmer. Nonetheless, I had no issues using this monitor in its minimum brightness in a completely pitch black environment. Moving on from luminance, I would like to talk about brightness uniformity, and on my tested panel, which I do appreciate is somewhat lottery, it actually did a pretty good job across the board. The same could be said about the overall backlight bleed, which is non-existent given it has got an OLED panel. This image was actually taken with my keyboard light on because in a completely pitch black environment, my camera was not able to pick up a completely pitch black image from the monitor. Now, while everything is actually pretty impressive, there are certain limitations that you should consider before purchasing this monitor because of its OLED panel. And indeed over here, if you're coming from an LCD, there are certain considerations that you should have. Now, first off, you've got the burn-in effect, which is of course something that you should be actually worried about because it's going to affect any sort of OLED panel. Thankfully over here, Philips provide you a 3-year warranty and a bunch of ways of mitigating it via the monitor's OSD. Here you have got screensaver, pixel orbiting, pixel refresh, auto warning, multi-logo protection, boundary dimmer, taskbar dimmer, and also thermal protection. All of these have been done in order for you to mitigate the burn-in effect and therefore prolong the life of this monitor, all of which are certainly appreciated. Now furthermore, it is also worth mentioning that OLEDs have got a slightly different sub-pixel layout, and as a result might have that fringing effect. In other words, some sort of different lighting that is occurring behind, for example, text. Of course, it won't really be of importance to gamers out there, but as someone who does look at a lot of text because I'm a journalist, I actually did find it to be a non-issue with this monitor. Not only because it has got a QD-OLED panel, which does generally do better than WOLEDs, at least in my opinion, but also because of that resolution of 4K. Here you'll be able to see the comparisons of this monitor in comparison to some other monitors, be it QD-OLED, WOLEDs, or of course a regular LCD panel. And hopefully you'll agree with me that the overall fringing effect is actually pretty minimal and therefore won't actually throw you off if you're actually reading a lot of text. Next up we get onto the overall build quality, and here you've got a 3-sided boss design with a small bottom bezel, which is actually in silver, which stands out in comparison to some of its competitors. The same could be said about its built-in stand, which has got a recycled material and a white finish to it. Now the built-in stand does provide you good ergonomics with height, swivel and tilt adjustments, although it's worth mentioning over here that it cannot be rotated, which doesn't really bother me. If however it does, you can replace it with a VESA compatible stand, and here there are mounting brackets that are found within the box and therefore allows you to place it on a monitor arm or a multi-monitor setup. Now at the back of the monitor you might have noticed an all white finish, which I do think has been done on purpose because it further accentuates the lights that are found at the back. Now normally I don't really like RGB lights on monitors because they don't really serve a purpose and increase the overall power consumption. However, in this respect it's using the Philips Ambiglow technology, which can actually be customized, for example, to follow what you're seeing on your screen, therefore giving you an extra degree of immersion. The light's actually pretty bright and therefore will project to a nearby wall, and if you're going to be using the monitor in a completely pitch black room, then it's something that you might actually want to utilize. I actually do like the fact that it's included and do respect the fact that it's not going to be as good as the Ambi light technology that I found on Philips's TVs. Nonetheless, it's a great inclusion and certainly does stand out in comparison to some of its competitors. Now the Ambiglow technology can be customized via the monitor's OSD, which can be accessed via a small little joystick button that's found at the bottom right hand side and at the back of the monitor. The OSD itself is very comprehensively laid out, although I don't really like the contrast between white and purple. Nonetheless, whilst you do get your head around it and you do notice the different contrasting menus, it is actually pretty easy to navigate. Furthermore, you've also got the Philips Evnia Precision Center software, which further gives you more customization, be it if you want to customize the Ambiglow technology or other, and also gives you quick access to certain settings. Although it's worth noting over here that you'll need the USB Type B to Type A cable connected up to the monitor, which is provided in the box. Now, 3D Monitor's OSD, you might have noticed a audio setting, and yes indeed, the monitor has got two 5-watt speakers built in, with DTS sound. And here, with the music preset selected, I actually found that the overall sonic reproduction was decent, at least for a set of built-in speakers on a monitor. It's never going to replace a set of bookshelf speakers, a DAC, headphones, or indeed a headset. But nonetheless, it's good to see them included for those people who do just want to route audio directly from the monitor. On that note, the monitor has got a 3.5mm jack, allowing you to plug in your headphones directly into the monitor. Now, this does actually perfectly bring me onto connectivity, and here, no matter which display input that you choose, you'll be able to output 4K at 240Hz. This is because you've got two HDMI 2.1 ports, a singular DisplayPort 1.4 input, and also USB Type-C. The latter is also quite handy because it delivers up to 65 watts of power, making it useful for those people who connect up a laptop and simultaneously want to charge it. Now, furthermore, the monitor has got a built-in KVM switch, which means that you can plug in your peripherals such as your mouse and keyboard via the two USB Type-A ports which are available on this monitor, and then switch between sources, for example a laptop and a desktop computer, without having to plug and replug your peripherals. If you want some more information of how a KVM switch operates, make sure you check out my video on this that can be found up on your pop-up banner or by following the links down in the description below. So with all that in mind, it brings me on to my verdict, and indeed it is my favourite 4K gaming monitor, as it hopefully has been obvious throughout this review. It has got a very responsive 4K panel, be it in terms of its input lag or in terms of its response times. It also has got that fluidity at 240Hz, which one-ups some of the cheaper alternatives which come in at roughly 144Hz. You've also got good sort of motion clarity despite the omission of MBR. You've got good color accuracy, at least in the sRGB color space. You've got that glossy panel, which will be appreciated, specifically if you're running, for example, an HDR signal. You've got those adaptive sync technologies, a comprehensively laid out OSD, a nice build quality, and also to add the cherry on top, you've got the Ambi-Glow technology as well to give you that extra bit of immersion. Given all of this, it's very easy to recommend this monitor, and as such, it gets my Best Buy award. But of course, do consider some of the limitations that I've highlighted throughout this review, and as such, I'd be curious to know what you make of it down in the comment section below. If you have enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated and allows me to continue delivering honest reviews like this one. As such, I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.